Hey, welcome to The Critical Catholic. I'm Mike Lewis, and I'm here with David Lafferty. You got to enjoy a rough cut of our little theme song, our public domain or Creative Commons music. Anyway, so this is our first live broadcast. I'm sure some of you saw our warm-up show, and those of you who are Patreon sponsors saw our warm-up show. Anyway, well, welcome, David.
Thanks, Mike. I'm excited to be here. This is our first sort of official episode, so it should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and so I think the thought behind this was, obviously where Peter is expanding. We've got more diversity. We've got a lot more people. We've got a lot of interesting guests who want to take part. And one of the early things that we did, though, in terms of audio-visual content was the Peter's Field Hospital podcast. And a lot of our most popular episodes were these like deep dives into social phenomena and thinking and theories that are going on in the Catholic world. And obviously with, Where Peter is Live, we didn't know how that was going to materialize, but there was good chemistry between me and Rachel and Melinda. And then there was that fourth slot, and we kept switching people in and out. We were able to have you twice, I think. But it's sort of like, people want to see more of David Lafferty. People want to hear, those of us who have a little bit of a geeky side to us, enjoy these deep probes into, where did these ideas come from? Who are these people? And so anyway, this is, so I invited David because one of the things is doing the audio non-live podcast it can be time consuming to edit it, and you're tempted to like take out every single and to make sure. And granted, you want to make a live stream as professional and as well produced as possible. I notice I'm a little bit dim. I might need to improve the lighting in this room, for example. But I mean, we can be more. We're forced to be more concise. We would record for 2 or 3 hours, and we might wind up using 2/3 of that material, and trying to fit everything into an hour. So.
Because there's always so much to talk about. I started, contributing to Where Peter is back in 2019. I think this was kind of early 2019, and I couldn't take any more of the what I considered to be the sort of fever that seemed to have gripped a lot of Catholic media, where there was all this misinformation circulating, a lot of conspiracy theories entering the church in sometimes very subtle ways and sometimes very not so subtle ways, a lot of them revolving around Pope Francis. And that inspired me to contribute. And although I don't always contribute those types of pieces, that's kind of my specialty. I have a PhD, so I was a bit of an academic for a while. I studied an author named Wyndham Lewis very intensely, and he was a modernist writer, not a Catholic modernist in the like a theological modernist. But
so Pius X didn't condemn him specifically.
No, okay. he wasn't on that list. No, he was a colleague of people like Ezra Pound, T.S. Eliot, James Joyce, even a little. So he was part of this world of literary modernism, and the literary modernists, they were active in the sort of early 20th century into the 1920s and 30s. And Wyndham Lewis did for a time fall under the grip of what I would call conspiracy theory. He never went as far as his friend Ezra Pound, who completely gave himself over to conspiracy theory, ended up broadcasting on the radio during World War II from fascist Italy on behalf of Mussolini and the fascists, and was eventually almost. Well, he was arrested after the war. He was put on trial as a traitor. He could have, potentially been executed, but he ended up in a mental institution. So, and again, these people were geniuses. A lot of them, I think Wyndham Lewis was a genius. I think Ezra Pound was a genius. Even T.S. Eliot dipped into the sort of conspiracy theory world a little bit, and it shows that so many people can be susceptible to this kind of thinking. It said that Marshall McLuhan actually early on fell into conspiracy theory and pulled himself out before he started writing his most famous works. But he had a period where he fell into that too. So it's very common, and even among very intelligent people. And so after I did that, I wrote a paper. Later on, I switched topics entirely and wrote a paper on a British author named Douglas Reed, who was a guy who was very famous in the late 1930s. He wrote a best-selling book called Insanity Fair, which was actually an anti-Nazi book. But the odd thing about Douglas Reed was that he was also very deeply anti-Semitic, and so he came up with this grand conspiracy theory in which the Nazis, and Hitler in particular, were sort of puppets of the Jews who were controlling the world, and so it's a really utterly
Jack Chick like how Jack Chick thinks that the Catholic Church started Islam and the Nazis and the Freemasons, right?
Yes. So that's the thing. Like it's and these are smart people. Like Douglas Reed was a really talented guy. He was a journalist. He wrote books that a lot of people were really gripped by. But then he just descended further and further into this conspiracy type thinking, and never got out of it. So I could see that in Catholic media that sort of and the sort of the Catholic social media world starting to creep in. And I thought, now we've got to take some action here and at least try to separate some of the the junk from the stuff that may have a grain of truth, and try to sort through all of this. And again, some people would say it's not a good idea to pay attention to these guys. I understand that argument, but I don't believe in it anymore, because we've seen what happens when you don't pay attention. These things fester and they can explode. So, I mean, we saw that, in the United States on January 6th, where, a lot of the people who were storming the Capitol were doing so on behalf of ideas that were, frankly, just pure lies. So we've seen how this can have real world consequences.
And I think one of the things that, we've talked about this before, I think the brave new world of the internet has really globalized some of these conspiracy theories. We talk about, we've had this conversation before, that Taylor Marshall's book, Infiltration, is a rehash of all of these conspiracy theories that were, that were big in like Malachi Martin novels in the 1970s, or, Lefebvre's and Sedevacantis all bought into these different conspiracy theories, even pulling some anti-Catholic Protestant fundamentalist conspiracy theories and slapping them together. But the thing is, they are reaching, and I grew up with some of these conspiracy theories, and I grew out of them. I started to think more critically. I started to do more research, realized that these things were not backed up by historical documentation, by, there just weren't facts behind a lot of these things. And there were a lot of contradictions. But what's happened is what used to be these tiny little fringe conspiracy theories, because Catholic traditionalists in the olden days had to be part of a traditionalist community, which usually were fairly small, or they were on a mailing list, and there wasn't a single person with their mindset that they could talk to in person, other than their family. If they had one, they could rant at them at Thanksgiving or something. But it's the problem is, it's like, what I'm starting to realize is that people as a whole are much more susceptible to these theories than I gave them credit to than I gave them credit for before. Like, I used to take these deep dives and just be for my own amusement. Like, how can anybody believe this stuff or whatever? But then I start to see really smart people and really accomplished people, great theologians, great writers, cardinals, archbishops, and sharing these thoughts unironically.
Yeah, and one of the issues, I think, is that, we try to, present the church to others in a positive way, and there's nothing wrong with doing that, of course. But at the same time, we have to take a critical look at church history, the Catholic culture, and how Catholic culture has at times been very susceptible to conspiracy theory. So, like you said, in the 1970s and after, you get the traditionalist conspiracy theories. Before that, in the late 19th century and leading up to eventually World War II, there was a huge explosion of anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, like starting in France, especially. So you have someone like Edouard Drumont, who was in the late 19th century. He wrote a book called Jewish France, and he was Catholic, and a lot of the people who listened to him were Catholic. He published this book that became this massive bestseller, became like the talk of France for a long time, and spawned so much anti-Semitic hatred. And then you find that transferring to other countries. You find it entering into, like, say, groups like the Action Française, the sort of pseudo-fascist Catholic organization that eventually had to be sort of condemned by the Vatican. And you see it. It was actually in Canada. You saw a lot of this stuff coming into Quebec in the early 20th century, and building up. There was a very anti-Semitic segment of Catholics in Quebec at that time, and of course, it all this contributed to the horror that eventually was World War II, and we can't, and the Holocaust. We can't hide that stuff, because when we do, it has this way of creeping back, right? So. Yeah. Well, we can talk about all the very many good things that Catholics have done, and the great things that the church has been involved in. I think we have to look at the ugly side too, or else there's a chance that it'll just keep returning over and over again. So that's very important, I think.
So before we turn to our main topics, I know you brought a little prayer to sort of kick off the discussion, and we have a few topics that we want to discuss, and hopefully we'll be out of here by the time the hour's up.
We're going to try to keep it quick and go through things in a very orderly fashion. So yes. I have just a very simple prayer for us here. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Heavenly Father, please guide us in our discussion. Help us to dispel confusion, discern fact from fiction, and cleave to the truth in a world that is filled with so many misrepresentations. Amen.
Amen.
In the name of the Father and the Son. Okay.
All right. So I guess the first topic that you wanted to cover was the most recent Vegano letter, the declaration, I guess, the V drop on the 5th International Vatican Conference. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So I thought that was worth bringing up, because Vigano is still with us, and he's still regularly doing his V drops. Now he doesn't really have much of an audience in the mainstream church anymore, although maybe more of an audience than we realize, because there may be people listening to him and reading what he says who won't admit it. But he definitely has found an audience among a certain group of Catholics, and among people who are very devoted to the sort of Make America Great Again cause and mentality, even after the January 6th fiasco. So he published on, let me see, I think it was April 20th, published a declaration and it was regarding the fifth international Vatican Conference. So this conference, it's scheduled for May 6th to 8th. It's called Unite to Prevent and Unite to Cure, Exploring the Mind, Body, and Soul. And just to provide a bit of context, so the goal of the conference, according to their website anyway, is to unite people and promote a culture of collaboration by stimulating an open dialogue and encouraging an interdisciplinary approach to tackle major healthcare challenges around the globe. They say that this is consistent with the mission of the Cura Foundation and the Pontifical Council for Culture to enrich the human experience by bringing together people of diverse backgrounds and religions and advocating for the vulnerable. So this is a big conference. They cover a lot of different topics relating to health, everything from, the availability of medicines to mental health to things like neurological health and these are some of the big health issues that on a global scale are really affecting people. And the speakers, they include this wide variety of doctors and professors, and people involved in the business and nonprofit world. It's definitely not a sort of homogeneously Catholic bunch. I think the intention here is to establish sort of partnerships or dialogue or initiatives across with all types of people, all types of organizations that have similar goals. But it also includes some celebrities. So like Chelsea Clinton, she's become something of a health ambassador, I believe, these days. Deepak Chopra, the sort of new age guy, Cindy Crawford, Jane Goodall, and then Joe Perry of Aerosmith.
And one of the things that I just want to kind of point out, because I think this is where a lack of context and a lot of lack of historical knowledge kicks in for many critics of this meeting and of other things that have been hosted under Pope Francis, is that if you look at the Pontifical Academy of Science, for example, that's been around since 1930. It was established by Pius XI, I believe. It's a body that meets every year, twice a year, it's changed its schedule. And a lot of times it was more of an honorary group, but it has always included non-Catholic experts in their scientific field. The late Stephen Hawking was famously a member of it. You go back, Niels Bohr, was an atheist who was a scientist who sat on it. And I don't know if you could say it was a majority of the people on the Pontifical Academy of Sciences were non-Catholic. I think probably being a Catholic scientist that was prominent got you a quicker invite, but it wasn't necessarily ever a matter of we just want our little ideological niche here. It's the Pope is not a scientific authority. Scientists are scientific authorities, and the Pope, so science teaches us the what, or the how, and then the Church provides the greater meaning behind it. So a conference
like this is not about establishing or outlining doctrine or anything like that. It's about looking at sort of tangible solutions to existing problems, through collaboration, through scientific collaboration.
And exactly. And one of the other things that I want to bring up is that if you look at Fratelli Tutti, one of the main points that Pope Francis was making, and with regards to fraternity, is that despite differences that we may have on some issues, where are the areas that we can work together to make a better world? So people look at Chelsea Clinton's position on abortion, or the fact that she responded to a tweet from the Church of Satan or something one time, and now Vigano thinks she's a member, even though she sarcastically responded to them one time. But it's like she is talking about children's health, vaccine equity, human rights. When we're in agreement with her on these issues, we want her to speak about these issues because she can actually reach other people than a priest or a bishop can about very vital issues that are, that are facing our world.
Yeah, and once you've established these kind of connections and you've got this sort of great dialogue going, then you can bring in, ethical issues. Now, even in this conference, I noticed that there's sessions that are going to be held on, the potential ethical implications of using CRISPR technology. This is like a gene editing technology. And so they're going to look at some of those things, like, how could this be ethically problematic? So it's sort of like, in a very subtle way, it's bringing people who might not otherwise think about ethics from a Catholic perspective into that sort of conversation. So I think it's potentially, something very productive. And I mean, having people like Chelsea Clinton or Joe Perry there, it also helps to just generate some attention, right? Although I think Joe Perry's, he's going to talk about music and mental health or something along those lines, or music and healing. So he's there for a reason. It's not just, like I think these people all have genuine interest in global health. Now, of course, and one of the things that probably would have triggered Vigano is that Anthony Fauci is going to be there as well. So the director of I guess it's the U.S. National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Yeah, I was never quite sure what his actual position was. I just always hear about him. But yeah, he's become, in that world that the Vigano inhabits, he's become such a notorious figure. And that's the thing. I think if you read the letter, he just, Vigano, it's clear that he's looking at these people not as people, but they're more like symbols, right? Like they're more like symbols of all the things that he despises, all the things that he thinks are out to destroy the church. So he describes Chelsea Clinton as just quite simply a follower of the Church of Satan. And like you said, this comes from a tweet from 2018 where I think she had been included on a thread with the Hooters, the bar Hooters, and she was kind of embarrassed about that. And she said, "Isn't it crazy how we can end up being put on these threads with all these people we wouldn't otherwise associate with?" She said once I got caught on a thread with the Church of Satan, and then of course the Church of Satan people pop up and say, "Hey, Chelsea Clinton, nice to see you," and she says, "Hey, nice to see you too," and now that means that she is a follower of the Church of Satan, that she loves the Church of Satan, that she
and the Church of Satan has like a search query, because probably the guy who runs it sits there and like watches Twitter to see if anybody mentions the Church of Satan, so he can reply.
Well, they popped up on one of my threads once in one of the I think it was the previous Vigano letter. I was talking about how he said that the Church of Satan is sort of about to launch this global initiative to kind of take over. I don't know, I forget exactly what it was, but it was some kind of just insane theory about the power of the Church of Satan. And right when I wrote that, about 2 minutes later, the Church of Satan itself pops up in my thread saying, that's ridiculous. But so and anyone who has ever looked into the Church of Satan knows that they're kind of like this geeky organization that likes to, sort of
atheists
trigger people. Yeah, they're atheists.
They don't believe in Satan.
They don't believe in God. They don't believe in Satan. They don't worship Satan. They just think Satan is a symbol for rationalism and self-interest and hedonism, and that's what they
making religious people upset. Really,
yeah, and staging stupid things to to kind of push the boundaries of what's allowed, in terms of religious freedom. So, that's why they're there. But so, Vigano just takes that for granted, which is unbelievable. He talks about how all these people are, it's a slew of abortionists and Malthusians and globalists. He says, and of course he makes, as usual, incredibly bold claims about the Vatican. He says, or about the church, he says, the Holy See has deliberately renounced the supernatural mission of the church, making itself the servant of the New World Order and Masonic globalism in an antichristic counter magisterium. So, I mean, these are ridiculous
I like the
words.
one wonders if Bergoglio's, he doesn't call him Francis, if Bergoglio's zeal for the dissemination of the gene serum is not also motivated by base economic reasons. Um, you know, as compensation for the losses suffered by the Vatican and the dioceses following the lockdown. Now, here he's saying, a year ago, he's saying the Vatican was behind the lockdown, and now they're holding this satanic meeting in order to because they've lost out during the lockdown. I mean, it's inconsistent, it's irrational.
Yeah, none of it makes sense, and I think that it's because, and we talked about this a little before, and I'm sure we'll talk about it again. But when you enter into this world, especially the world that I think Vigano is inhabiting, where he's kind of shut off from everybody, I think it seems that he's kind of seeing the world through the internet, through these particular, probably far right and like traditionalist Catholic type sites that he visits. He's seeing the world symbolically. It has nothing to do with true or false or facts or anything like that. It's this symbolic reality that he's entered into, and it doesn't have to make sense in terms of it doesn't have to be logical for it to work for him. So one thing that I find, though, that's disturbing to me about Veganos Rhetoric is, and now I got to say that he's never said anything explicitly anti-Semitic, but if you look at the history of this kind of rhetoric, the most prominent examples you would find would be exactly that Catholic French anti-Semitism that we saw in the late 19th century, entering into all the way up to World War II, and then it was continued afterwards by people like Father Dennis Fahey from Ireland, and this idea of Vigano is always referring to a Masonic conspiracy. He talks about a Masonic elite. He talks about the infamous Masonic sect and all this kind of stuff. So it's the idea that the Freemasons are really the ultimate string pullers here. But the problem is, within this strain of Catholic thinking, Masons and Jews are often used interchangeably. So there's what's called the Judeo-Masonic conspiracy theory, and that's the idea that the Jews created Freemasonry, used it to bring about the French Revolution, and then have been basically behind Freemasonry, throughout. And it's something that I think it allowed people to take some of the Pope's statements, like Pope Leo XIII, wrote an encyclical against Freemasonry, which is very, very harsh, and but it doesn't touch on, it doesn't say anything about Jewish people, but the Judeo-Masonic idea allowed people to take statements by the church on Freemasonry and then sort of turn it into, or make it part of this anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. So that's the problem. This rhetoric is so close. It's such an echo of the kind of stuff you would have heard in the late 19th century, early 20th century in France around that time, right down to the quotation from the Our Lady La Salette about Rome losing the faith and becoming the seat of the Antichrist. And that's from a sort of false version, or a false version of that.
An embittered version,
which some people have said has like sort of anti-Semitic elements to it, and it would make sense if it was so. But before, elsewhere, Vigano has talked about, in the context of these Masonic elites, he's talked about, usurer bankers being part of this and all this kind of stuff. And it's just, it feeds into this idea where you're kind of blurring the line. There's not that much like serious Freemasonic conspiracy theory these days. Like that's not a big thing, but anti-Semitic conspiracy theory has always been around. It's always there. It's the most, most destructive and sort of most popular conspiracy theory in the end. And I worry because sometimes this endless talk of Freemasonry can be a sort of cover for anti-Semitism. But again, Vigano hasn't said anything that would explicitly, target Jewish people. But at the same time, I fear that this is the kind of rhetoric that he's toying with.
Yeah, I know. Well, Vigano, Burke, and Taylor Marshall, a lot of these guys are bringing up the Freemasons, which is really, I mean, the funny thing is, maybe I'm ignorant to some degree, but based on a lot of what I've heard, their membership has fallen. I drove by a Masonic lodge a couple of months ago, and there were might have been a year ago, might have been before the pandemic, but there were a couple of guys in kilts standing outside the, like 80-year-old guys wearing kilts standing outside the building. And I'm not to downplay the theological problems. Freemasons they're different kinds. I mean, there's the Continental Freemasons, I guess, which started out of the Grand Orient Lodge in France. See, I studied this stuff a little bit.
Yeah.
And they are atheistic, I believe, and extremely anti-clerical, whereas the English version, which is more of what we have here or was transferred over to the US, is a little bit, you have to believe in God, but their interpretation of God or their understanding of God is not compatible with the church's view of God. But I guess there are people that are members, but it's really not. I mean, I don't even know what it's like, if they're just making it up. They're not providing any evidence. I mean, that's one thing I think that we can say about Vigano is shortly after he and I think Steve Skojak actually mentioned this on a recent article he wrote on 1 Peter 5. There was, I know Henry Sire, the dictator Pope author, who wrote that book anonymously, but then came out of hiding, wrote a tweet saying that Vigano was sitting on a death switch or a kill switch. Basically, he had a pile of documents that proved everything he said was true. And I think Christine Niles quote tweeted it and added more information that, if he truly is in danger and if anything happens to him, this is going to come out. Well, first of all, that doesn't make any sense, because if he actually had evidence, maybe he should have included that with his testimony rather than just word of mouth. But secondly, after his being trashed by the McCarrick report, if he can prove that he's telling the truth, then why wouldn't he do that? And the thing that's astounding to me is that people are still defending him. I mean, you're saying nobody serious, but it's like he's published in the Remnant. Taylor Marshall just defended him the other day, and I don't know how popular I don't know if the Taylor Marshall popularity thing is still going on, but Patrick Coffin, to bring up another name, has promoted his work.
Well, actually, this particular piece is I'm not sure if it was written for this conference in particular, but it was published on Patrick Coffin's site because Vigano was supposed to speak, or I don't know if he did speak or he was supposed to speak this weekend at a sort of a conference on COVID-19 and things like that. So Patrick Coffin has been pushing this. Patrick Coffin has also, he has given a platform, I guess, to E. Michael Jones, who is genuinely, I believe, an anti-Semite. He explicitly targets Jews in his writing. Why
don't we roll back, because we actually jumped ahead to the next topic? Why don't you give us a little bit of the rundown on who Patrick Coffin is and why, and what's the latest with that story?
Sure. So Patrick Coffin, I think many people will know him now. He's a podcaster, YouTube personality. Was formerly on Catholic Answers Live. He was supposed to hold an online event called the Truth Over Fear Summit, COVID-19 and the Great Reset, from April 30th to May 2nd. But the platform that he was using for hosting the summit apparently kicked him off. So he claimed that there were 50,000 attendees when they were shut down, and they will be holding the summit next weekend. So they're postponing. And Vigano was at least supposed to speak at this summit. Some of the other people who are slated to speak include Robert F. Kennedy Jr., very prominent guy in the sort of vaccine skeptic or COVID skeptic world. Stephen Mosher, this sort of anti-China propagandist, I would say, Vigano, and then G. Edward Griffin, I'm not really sure what he's doing here, but he's a conspiracy theorist who wrote a book about the Federal Reserve, and his idea is based on there's a whole sort of subgenre of Federal Reserve conspiracy theory, I guess you could say, where the United States is under the control of bankers because of the Federal Reserve, and so he wrote a kind of a book that has become quite popular in that world.
Yeah, I'm going to share a link right now because actually
Sure.
I did mention that, and I don't know if the title of this piece is what led to the title of this podcast for you, but basically what I called it was Catholic media and critical thinking.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, one thing that we both of us discussed is that 10 years ago or 8 or 9 years ago, Francis's first year, the last few years of Pope Benedict, I used to listen to Catholic Answers Live on my way home every day. It ran from 6 to 8 or something Eastern time. And it's Patrick Coffin. He was an affable guy. He had good banter with his guests, upholding the magisterium of the church. And then, shortly before he disappeared from the Catholic Answers Network and went his own way, he started saying some really negative things about Pope Francis. And it seems to me that is that's almost the gateway drug for who knows where the floor is. Like, once you've decided that Pope Francis is working to destroy the Catholic Church or working against Catholic truth or working against Catholic doctrine, like, once you make that decision and once you come out with your public statement, it's like all bets are off. You could be talking about aliens and reptilians running the Vatican within 3 years. Once you write that manifesto.
Yeah, there was a very fateful episode I saw of, I forget whether it was Patrick Coffin's show or Taylor Marshall's show, but it was Taylor Marshall, Timothy Gordon, Patrick Coffin all on at the same time, talking about how they were getting red pilled on Pope Francis, and that's when I knew, whoa, this has really crossed the line now, and we're getting into some really weird territory. And I think Patrick Coffin in particular has really been thriving on the opposition he's faced in that respect, because he seems to really revel in people getting mad at him for what he says, and he takes that as a sign that he's doing something right. So he thinks that he's just fighting political correctness and stuff. I don't think he realizes just how far he's gone and how deep he's gone into this, but he probably does. I mean, I'm sure he understands, because his once he got into the COVID-19 conspiracy theory stuff, and that's when he started getting shut down. So he eventually lost his YouTube account, and it's the same thing with LifeSite News. They get shut down.
It's not even over Catholic doctrine.
No, it's not.
It's not even standing up for the truth. It's I want to promote this conspiracy theory that, even though I am just some guy with a master's degree in theology or something, I'm going to proclaim what I believe to be the truth about a public health crisis, over and above every, 99% of the trained doctors and scientists out there, and I'm going to risk losing my entire platform over it. I mean,
yeah.
how critical is that thinking there?
And it's really at this point, it's not a free speech issue, because I mean the platforms that are hosting these people, or that have kicked them off now, these are businesses. They do not want to be held liable for what might happen if people use their platform as a means of spreading misinformation on a huge scale. It could lead to large scale death potentially. We're still in the middle of a global pandemic, and so they don't want to take that risk, and so they're going to say, forget it, we're not going to let you do that. Especially after January 6th, we saw a lot of this. People were like, no, that's it, we're not going to host people talking about election fraud stuff. We're not going to host anyone talking about COVID-19 conspiracy stuff. So if you want to go that way, you're going to have to end up on these kind of alternative platforms like Gab, and there's a whole bunch of kind of alternative YouTubes and stuff.
Is that still around?
Parler, yeah. Well, it was off for a while. I think it might be back. And I mean, these places, they're awful because they're just like real cesspools where you end up just like.
I mean, I tried to get on there one time just to like find stuff, just like to look around, and it wasn't very searchable. And then the only person at the time, I mean, this was like 3 months ago, or maybe even it was sometime after the election, but the only person who seemed to use it on a daily basis was Dinesh D'Souza. He would, he'd post about 3 times a day, but everyone I looked up like Father Z and Taylor Marshall and all these people, Patrick Coffin, who said they were going to switch to Parler, and it was like their last post had been 2 weeks before. I mean, it's a substandard platform.
Very, yeah. I mean, when I would go on, it would basically be Milo posting constantly, and that was the main sort of feature, because he was blocked from all the other social media. I thought he
was only on there for a day or something like that and got kicked off.
Oh, he did get kicked off at one point, and then it's very funny with Parler and these type of things. They go off and on, and people sometimes do get kicked off, and then they get let back on, and so they're very chaotic, very chaotic. So, but anyway, I don't have a whole lot of sympathy. I mean, I do believe in freedom of speech. I do believe that people should be able to say unpopular things, but we've reached a point where, people have been weaponizing misinformation in a way that is profoundly dangerous, and no private company is going to want to take that risk of being held responsible for that. We saw, after the Christchurch shootings it was New Zealand. People were looking at where are the forums that these people people like these shooters are being radicalized on, and so these forums started losing hosts because, of course, a business is not going to want to host some free speech forum that inspires people to go on shooting sprees. That's where you cross the line. It's not freedom of speech anymore. So I don't have too much sympathy in this respect. But
I do have, I guess, a question. I mean, I don't know that it really does play out in any extremely different scenario. But what do you think would have happened if, let's say, YouTube and Facebook had been 30 to 40% more tolerant, or had waited that much longer before shutting some of these accounts down?
I actually, in retrospect, I do think it could have stopped a lot of what was going on. I mean, we saw after January 6th when Trump was taken, his Twitter account was taken off. So he no longer had a means of just kind of instantly, popping out whatever was on his mind, or retweeting all these people who, some of these, conspiracy theorists. I mean, by the end, he was retweeting people like Ron Watkins, one of the guys who was likely behind Q. He was, retweeting all these people.
Let's say it had been allowed to fester for.
Oh, you're saying more. Yeah, if it had been allowed to fester even further, I don't know. I think it would have only gotten worse. I think.
I mean, do you think it would have been like real? Like, obviously, the Capitol insurrection was one of the most dramatic things that we've seen in Washington, D.C. But I mean, do you think it would have been even more violent or deadly? Or, I mean, the thing is, they riled up so many people. I don't know how quickly they were making converts, or everyone who's been converted already had, like, I don't know. I just wonder what would have happened if they had been allowed to continue for longer than they did, or if Patrick Coffin and LifeSite were allowed to stay, and Father Chad Ripperger were allowed to stay on YouTube.
Well, it could have been very destructive, especially at a time like right now when we're trying to get the vaccines out to as many people as we can. Here in Ontario, we're still, the vaccine rollout is very slow, so we're having a rough time right now with COVID.
Have you gotten scheduled, or what's the scenario?
No, I'm waiting basically to be scheduled. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, we're under basically a lockdown right now. So we're not going anywhere these days, and it'll probably be like that into the maybe at least, the beginning of the summer. We'll see what happens. But to have people spreading just on a massive scale misinformation about the vaccines, it's dangerous. And people, when it's one thing when people are expressing unpopular ideas in a sort of protected environment, or an environment where you expect to hear some really oddball ideas. It's another thing when it's just getting pumped into people's Facebook feeds or Twitter feeds or that sort of thing. And a lot of people just take it as truth, and that's the problem, especially when it's connected to the faith, right? Like it's connected to, or allegedly sort of connected to true Catholicism.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we're going to see more. We'll see next weekend. We'll follow what goes on maybe with Patrick Coffin's Truth Over Fear Summit.
And maybe we can talk a little bit more about what we can do, what people can do to maybe evaluate these claims, because just like you were saying, they see it. They'll see these things and somehow they accept them uncritically. One of the things that I'm even kind of disappointed about, I mean, where Peter is, I think our audience is more critical.
Yeah.
Looks at things more critically than, I think a lot of people discover us because they hear a sensational version of something, the Amazon ceremony in October 2019. And they're like, okay, these people are claiming that it was demon worship and the mainstream media is ignoring it. Like, what's the other side of the story? And we were there to tell that story. And that's happened with the dubia and plenty of other things that have been sensationalized and radicalized. But one thing that, with you running the website, we can look at the back end, like, where does our traffic come from? Does it come from Twitter? Does it come from Facebook? Does it come from another website? And you can also see where we send people. So, like, let's just say, an article that we post has 1,000 viewers, and we might have, and it might be like, basically like, we'll have a link in it that'll say, based on this, like, this is the fact, or this is the evidence, and we always try to provide that source. Like, what I find is a lot of these people won't provide a link to the thing that they're criticizing. They'll just give you their version of it. We want to make sure, we want you to be able, as much as possible, to, if it's on the internet, we want you to be able to link to it or look it up really easily to verify for yourself that it's correct. But I find that sometimes the click-throughs, like, let's say we have 1,000 hits on, or 1,000 views on a story, there might only be 15 or 20 clicks on that major link.
Yeah.
And if only 15 or 20 are doing that for Where Peter Is, I wonder how low the number is for Bob's YouTube channel or something like that.
Oh yeah. I mean, some people just read a headline and that's it. And then hit share, so that's a huge problem. We got to learn how to take that time to just say, all right, here's a claim. Let me at least read the article, see if it sounds like, does it have the ring of truth here? And then maybe just do a little digging. Often it doesn't take, you don't have to go, write a thesis on this stuff. Usually it just takes like a few minutes of, Googling and just checking a few sources maybe to find out, to get a pretty good idea of whether you're dealing with something that's real or
Well,
misleading.
I mean, you look at LifeSite News, and they don't provide. They quite often don't provide a link, or if they provide a link, it's to something that's foreign language sometimes, but it'll be like Cardinal so and so says abortion is the greatest thing ever, or is a blessing, and then you have to go hunting on your own. And sometimes it's very difficult. Sometimes you have to wait a few days, to keep that story in the back of your mind. And like, okay, here's the official translation, or here's the official statement. But that's their readers, I think, just put their trust in them. I mean, I don't want our readers to trust us that much.
No, not that much.
I mean, I want them to think that we're trying to be honest. I want them to trust us to that degree. But it's like, if I write something, I'm putting my opinion out there, and maybe I'm not doing the best analysis. I mean, I'm trying to do things. I'm trying to do it fairly. I'm trying to be honest, but I might have evaluated something differently. I have my own biases. I mean, if there's certain people I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt, and there's some people I'm going to doubt right off the bat.
Yeah. And, I think one of the other problems is that a site or an organization like LifeSite, they're able to produce an incredible amount of content. They have a lot of people working for them. They seem to have a lot of money coming in, donations and that sort of thing. They've got a big operation. So they can produce enough content that for a lot of people, this could be your only news source. You only have time to follow LifeSite news, because they try to, they cover all sorts of things, right? Like they even have like a sort of Catholic specific version of their site, and then a sort of general version of their site and everything. They have, like all the different shows and podcasts and things like that. So you could end up just being completely enwrapped in that world. And that's, even people who really like where Peter is shouldn't do that. They should, get out there, see what other people are saying, because there's so many voices out there. Just if people are interested in learning more about like issues relating to the vaccine, I can recommend Father Matthew P. Schneider, who
not to be confused with Bishop Athanasius.
Absolutely not Athanasius
Uncle
Schneider.
Athanasius.
You couldn't have two people.
Nephew Matthew.
You couldn't have two people more different, really. So Father Matthew Schneider has been doing a wonderful job online on Twitter and in blog posts, debunking a lot of stuff about the vaccine and about how some people are sort of twisting Catholic moral thinking in order to encourage people to reject the vaccine. So he's really someone to listen to.
Okay, real quickly, because we're running out of time.
Yeah.
The last topic that we're going to discuss. So like I was saying, you talk about how I was talking about how there would be like an anti-Francis manifesto where it's like, oh no, this person's gone off the deep end. But there's also the red pill, the QAnon phenomenon that happens to people. And I guess one of the things that was somewhat shocking, but not shocking to me recently was the interview that the actor who played Jesus, Jim Caviezel, he played Jesus in The Passion of the Christ, recently gave during a conference where he alluded to kind of being a true believer in some of these QAnon rumors. I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit, or
sure. This was a Health and Freedom Conference, it was called, and it was held in Tulsa, Oklahoma, on April 16th to 17th, and so this was like a real collection of some of these conspiracy titans right now. So you had General Mike Flynn, hero of the QAnon world, Lynn Wood, Sidney Powell, and then Mike Lindell of MyPillow. And the whole thing, it was scheduled to end with a mask burning ceremony. So this is the kind of thing we're talking about here. It's now Caviezel was on speaking about a film that he's in called Sound of Freedom. This is about a man named Tim Ballard and his organization Operation Underground Railroad. And Operation Underground Railroad their mission is to rescue children that have been sold into sex trafficking around the world, and they organize these operations to get them. And all I'll say about OUP, Operation Underground Rail, or sorry, OUR, is I encourage people to take a very critical look at them, and do a little digging and see what you find. But that's all I'll say about them. On to what Caviezel said. He said that he was talking about what Ballard and the organization Operation Underground Railroad do, and Caviezel said they're pulling kids out of the darkest recesses of hell right now, in dumbs and all kinds of places. The adrenochroming of children. So he uses this term adrenochroming, and he's asked by the host at this conference. He says, "Oh, that's an interesting term. How many people know that term?" And he says, "Can you explain a little more about this?" And Caviezel goes on and he says, "If a child knows that he's going to die, his body will secrete this adrenaline, and they have a lot of terms that they use that he." Sounds like he's referring to Tim Ballard, takes me through, but it's the worst horror I've ever seen. The screaming alone, even if I never, ever saw it, it's beyond. And these people that do it, there'll be no mercy for them. So that's. I'm trying to quote him exactly. The way that he said it, it was a little stumbling, but he talks about this idea of adrenochroming. This comes directly from the Pizzagate / QAnon conspiracy theory. It's this idea that elites around the world have been kidnapping children and torturing them in order to produce this adrenochrome, which they then drain from the children and use as a drug. And it gives them this apparently incredible high and keeps them young. So there's really no other source for this. There's no, this is not like, you can't just...
No, is it a real chemical, or is it
It is a real chemical. It's been looked into. This chemical does not have any of the effects that people say it does. Apparently,
so don't try it at home.
Do not try this. Yeah, the idea of it comes from. There's a movie about Hunter S. Thompson, starring Johnny Depp, and I think, and in one part of the movie, they talk about some kind of mythical example of, they're talking about all these obscure drugs or something like that, and they talk about adrenochrome. It's the human body produces it, and you can take it, and it gets you super high or something like that. But it's a myth. It's this has been explored. People have looked into this. Adrenochrome does not do that, and I don't know what would happen if you took it. Maybe you'd probably just get really sick. But there's no other source for this. And so the people on the QAnon Anonymous podcast, which I really like and can recommend, they kind of debunk a lot of Q stuff. They noticed that he said he's talking about Tim Ballard pulling kids out of DUMBs, DUMBs, and this is something that comes from previous conspiracy theories, and it means deep underground military bases. So the idea is that there's these super deep underground military bases like that, the global elites have all over the world, kind of like these dark sites or whatever, right? And this is where they keep, originally in conspiracy theory, this idea was associated with aliens. So this is where the government elites keep the aliens that they don't want the world to know about, right? So there's these races of grays or whatever that are living underground in these DUMBs, but now it's been modified so that these are the places where they're keeping all the children. It's terrifying to me that Jim Caviezel would be falling into this, because either he's just, he may just be incredibly naive and believes everything he hears, but it's very dangerous because, as I was talking about with Vegano, I don't know if Vegano, I can't say whether or not he's anti-Semitic, but some of the language he uses goes back to classic anti-Semitism, and it's the same with this. Other people have pointed this out. The whole adrenochrome idea goes back to the medieval blood libel, which again is a part of church history that we kind of have to pay attention to, which is the accusation that Jewish people kidnap Christian children, especially around Easter, torture them, and then crucify them, drink their blood. And many pogroms have occurred because of this this idea. It became it's sort of haunted European history, and it's become like it's one of the main themes of anti-Semitism that even appeared in Nazi Germany. So you have to be, I think, extremely careful, especially coming from a person who's Jim Caviezel is or at least was, basically a Catholic celebrity. He was a very faithful Catholic. He was in The Passion of the Christ, this big event. Great movie, I thought. But so he has to be extremely careful. But yeah, anyway, it's all part of this larger problem that I think we're seeing some of these pretty grotesque ideas coming up again, entering again, not just within the Catholic world, but sometimes outside and mixing together. This is what I think we need to watch. And I think, as we move forward with this show, we're going to do a little roundup every week of some of the things that are floating around and see if we can gain some perspective on them so that we can sort of see them from above, see them critically, and maybe hope, and maybe, we can help deter their spread.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everyone, for listening to this first live episode of The Critical Catholic with David Lafferty. And now I am going to try and see if our farewell music works. All right. Take care. See you next week. God bless.